All right, now the study guide showed us a method of grouping, but I want to show you the way that I prefer to pull out these greatest common factors. And then you can decide if you prefer the grouping method or if you prefer just dividing out a number or if you prefer this method I'm about to show you. So I like to break up each term into all of its parts. So for example, this 3x squared could be broken down into 3 times x times x. This 6x could be broken down into 3 times 2 times x. We then are looking for common factors. For example, a 3 is in common between both, and an x is in common between both. This would be my common factor that goes out in front, and the 2 remaining terms would be what is left inside. And then the sign from the original becomes the sign at the bottom. So my common factor is 3x, and what's left over is the x plus 2 inside. Now I can double check my answer by multiplying it. 3x times x makes 3x squared. 3x times 2 makes 6x. And that gives me an automatic check that it matches my original. And that's how I know I've done this correct. So let's try this method a couple times and see what you think. Let's break down each term. For example, 25, x to the third could be written like this. And I'm actually going to break it down to a negative 1 times 3 times 5. I hope you're okay with that. And then for 60, this could be 6 times 10, but that could be broken down even further into 3 times 2 times 5 times 2, or 6 times 10. So you've got to go down to its prime factorization, or smallest numbers. Let's look for in-commons here. Notice how I'm kind of trying to line things up so I can look for them. It has to be common in all 3 terms to apply. So there's definitely at least one x in everything, and there's definitely a 5 in everything. There's not a 2 or a 3 or another x in everything, so there's my common factor, my greatest common factor. And so the 5x is what goes out front, and the remaining items are all going to multiply and go back as my original terms inside. So 5 times x makes 5x squared minus 3 times x plus 2 times 3 is 6, 6 times 2 is 12. And so these items that are left over are what go left over in the parentheses. And then to double check that I did this correct, I'm just going to multiply to check my answer. That would give me 25x to the third, negative 15x squared, plus 60x. I look to double check that my answers match, and so I know that I've factored correctly. This could be broken down. So 36 is like 3 times 12. So 3 times 4 times 3. And again, that could get even smaller with a 2 and a 2, but it's not in everything, so I'm just going to keep it like that. So there's an x in everything. There's a 3 in everything, so that's my greatest common factor. What's left over up here is x squared plus 4x plus 12. And again, this 3 was in common, so it went out front. This x was in common, so it went out front. And all of these items that were left over, x times x multiplied here, 4 times x, and 12. Notice the signs plus plus went into my answer. Finally, I multiply 3x to the third plus 12x squared plus 36x, and I double check my answer, and it matches. All right, so if you already notice that 12 is going to come out of everything, great. But if you don't notice that, go ahead and multiply it out. So like 3 times 4, 3 times 4 times 3, because 12 times 3 is 36. And then 24 would be like 2 times 3 times 4. And I can see 1x in common, 2x's in common, and check out how this time I didn't line them up, so I'm going to kind of circle it sideways like that. There's a 3 in common and a 4 in common. There's our 12. So this 3 is in common, this 4 is in common, and an x and an x. So I'm going to multiply those all the way out. 12x squared, 3 times 4 is 12x squared, is my GCF. What's left inside, notice the minus and the minus for the signs. So x times x makes x squared minus what's left over, a 3 and an x, minus what's left over, a 2. So again, where did these come from? This x times this x was left over, this 3 and this x, and this 2. Notice the signs of minus and minus came from the original problem, and my greatest common factor of 12x squared is at the front. Again, I could multiply this all the way through to double check my answer. I get 12x to the 4th minus 36x to the 3rd minus 24x squared, and I see that that checks out with my answer. Now in this one, there happens to be a negative in common with all of them. So I did this as a negative 3 times everything else. So notice this time there is a negative in common, and then there's 1, 2 x's that are in common. So a negative 3, an x, and an x are going to make my common factor here out front. So negative 3x squared, and then leaving inside what's left over, x squared, 2x, and 3. Now, since we factored out the negative, that makes all of these signs positive. If I'm kind of like, is that right? Did I do that right? Let's multiply to double check. So, for example, negative 3x to the 4th. This would give me negative 6x to the 3rd, and this would give me negative 9x. I go up to double check. Absolutely, those signs are correct. So I did do it right. This time a negative is not going to factor out, so I'm just going to leave it as 5x to the 4th, 5 times 3, x to the 3rd, 5 times 4, and I see an x in common, another x in common, a 5 in common. So my GCF is 5x squared. What's left inside is going to be x squared, 3x, and 4. And so then I go up and add in all the signs. That makes this negative, positive, and negative. So my greatest common factor is here and here and here. What's left over inside the parentheses is here and here. And my signs came from the top. Let's double check that we did this correct. Negative 5x to the 4th plus 15x to the 3rd minus 20x squared. And I see that that does match my original problem, so it checks. Now, if you can already see, like, can an 8 go into 16? Yes, but can an 8 go into 36? No. So this does need to get broken down here again. So, for example, 4 times 2, 4 times 4, 4 times 9, or 3 and 3. And I can see there is a 4 in common, and there's at least one x in common. And then all of this is the leftovers that are going to go inside the parentheses. So 4 and an x comes out, 2x squared, 4x, and 9. And notice the signs here were minus and plus. If we're not sure on the signs, let's go ahead and double check by multiplying. 4x times 2x squared, negative 16x squared, and plus 36x. I look back up to the original, and these match, double checking my answer. Now this one has already been factored by grouping. So I can see that in common, I already have a 2x minus 7 and a 2x minus 7. So my GCF is a 2x minus 7, and what's left over will be the 3x minus 5. And then if I'm not sure if these are truly my factors, I can go ahead and FOIL the whole thing in order to get the original product, which here it was already grouped, so there's no point in us foiling, but this one is done. Last but not least, these little two on the back. Let's break these down. Now, if you go to do my method, you notice that there is nothing in common with all of these things. So this is one that's definitely set up for factoring by grouping. So let's find what there is in common with the first two terms. So notice in this first two terms that there's an x and another x, or an x squared can come out, and then leaving what's left over inside would be the x plus 3. So I'm factoring these both out by grouping. The x squareds came out, and the x plus 3 are still left inside. Now let's do the second one. Notice that a 7 comes out, and an x plus 3 is left inside. So now I look between the two. What is my common? My common is the x plus 3, leaving me the x squared plus 7 as my remainder. That goes in the last parentheses. And that one has now been factored. If I'm not sure if I got the right factors, I could FOIL. I would get x cubed plus 7x plus 3x squared plus 21. I look back up at my original answer, and though it's slightly out of order, it is correct. Last but not least, the same thing is going to happen here on this last one, where when you go to see what's in common, you're going to notice that there's not something in common all the way across the board. So for example, between these first two, I see an x and an x. So an x squared can come out, and a 2 can come out. So 2x squared is my common factor, leaving me an x minus 5 here in the middle. Notice the original sign had a minus. Notice there's a minus here, so we need a minus. Here in common is just a 3, leaving me an x minus 5 in this one as well. So notice the 2 and the x were in common. The 3 was in common. The x minus 5 at the back in both. So x minus 5 times 2x squared plus 3. If you're not sure on the signs, you can FOIL. And then I go back up to the beginning and double check, plus 3x. Oops, forgot a little squared right there. And then minus 15 and 2x to the third. This looks exactly like my original. Check. So we're good to go.